The myths surrounding the events of Bloody Sunday are considered one of the most destructive myths in Russian history and have negatively affected the reputation of the Tsar to this day. Some saw these events as a stumbling block to the canonization of Tsar Nicholas II. We must also not forget that he gained the insulting name Bloody because of these events. More than any other event, Bloody Sunday has been set forth as the banner of communist propaganda. Lenin even undertook the production of a film that depicted the so-called crime of Bloody Nicholas. Unfortunately, the period of Bolshevik dictatorship succeeded in etching what it desired in the consciousness of the people.
What is Bloody Sunday?
On January 22, 1905, a group of demonstrators headed by the extremist priest Gapon approached the Winter Palace to present a petition to Tsar Nicholas II. Confrontations ensued between them and the Imperial Guard, leading to injuries of varying severity on both sides.
Who is Georgy Gapon?
Georgy Apollonovich Gapon, February 17, 1870, April 10, 1906, was a Russian Orthodox priest of Ukrainian descent and a popular workers' leader before the 1905 Russian Revolution. George Gapon was not the good and kind father of the downtrodden workers that history portrays him as, but rather he played a double game. He was an agent of the Okhrana, the secret police, and at the same time collaborated with the Socialist Revolutionary Party. At first, he presented himself as an advocate of the Tsarist constitution. Later, Gapon seemed to rethink his ideology and then began to collaborate with the extreme left, which wanted to use him to spread its revolutionary ideas among the workers. The police warned him that it would be an illegal demonstration and that violence would be used to break it up if necessary. They also informed him that the Tsar would not be in the Winter Palace at that time, so it would be impossible to achieve the demonstrators' goal of presenting their demands to Tsar Nicholas in person. In the end, Gapon did not follow the police's instructions. The march went ahead as planned. He knew full well that the authorities would not allow the protest to take place under any circumstances because it simply would not have been peaceful, but he still urged them to demonstrate and insisted that they do so. After being exposed as a police informer, Gapon was murdered by members of the Socialist Revolutionary Party in 1906.
Were the workers' demands?
In addition to the 8-hour working day, the abolition of indirect taxes, and the equality of all before the law, there were demands such as separation of church and state, holding elections, ending the war by the will of the people, etc. It is impossible to imagine a simple factory worker demanding the separation of church and state, the end of the war on the distant outskirts of the city, and the convening of a constituent assembly. It is obvious that these demands were added by left-wing revolutionaries and did not come from the workers. The writers of the petition propose that the government capitulate politically and militarily. Most likely, most of the demonstrators were not aware that the petition made such openly revolutionary demands. The supposedly loyal nature of the petition itself is a demagogic ploy by Gapon, used as a kind of camouflage to disguise the revolutionary ultimatum. By creating a petition with obviously impossible and extremist demands, the revolutionaries were able to send thousands of people under the bullets of the military to provoke a conflict and clash with the authorities. The demonstrations were not peaceful. It is important to add that when the members of 3 Revolutionary Party organizations, namely the Social Democrats, Mensheviks, the Social Democrats, Bolsheviks, and the Social Revolutionaries, learned of the idea of presenting the petition to the Tsar, they decided to strengthen the ranks of the peaceful demonstrators on that fateful day. According to various witnesses, many of the demonstrators were armed. They broke windows, looted stores, set fire to vehicles, and even broke into houses. They also began to erect barricades with red flags. Major General Samgin reported that the troops arrested 163 people for robbery and armed resistance, indicating that there were militants in the crowd who were preparing to use violence. On January 9th, protesters attacked a nearby church and forcibly took banners and other religious symbols. In his memoirs, Gapon wrote,
"When I saw all this, I thought it would be well to give the whole demonstration a religious character, and I immediately sent several workers to the nearest church to fetch banners and pictures. But they refused to give them to us. I then sent 100 people to get them by force, and in a few minutes they brought them. Then I ordered that a royal portrait be brought from our department to emphasize the peaceful and decent character of our procession."
The shots fired by the security forces were therefore not fired in cold blood, but in response to the repeated provocations of the demonstrators.
Why didn't Tsar Nicholas II stay in the Winter Palace to receive the workers' demands?
The reason was the fear of yet another attempt on his life. These fears were justified. A frightening event had taken place only a few days earlier during the blessing of the waters on the day of Epiphany. Some of the rifles fired during the celebratory greeting of the feast were not loaded with blanks, as intended, but, quite strangely, contained live ammunition. The bullets wounded several of the bystanders and broke many windows in the neighborhood. Some of them passed directly over the head of the Tsar. The crowd and the police began to run aimlessly in all directions, causing great confusion and panic. However, Tsar Nicholas did not move one step from his place. Later at the palace, discussing the event with his sister Olga, he said that he had heard the shell was over his head and added, "I knew that somebody was trying to kill me. I just crossed myself. What else could I do? It was typical of Nicky," added the Grand Duchess. He did not know what fear meant.
Since Gapon knew that the Tsar was not there to receive the workers' demands, then why did he organize the demonstrations in the first place?
His genuine intention was to prove to the workers, in light of the measures to be taken against them, that the Tsar was not really protecting them and that the workers could never really hope to have any assistance coming from either the Tsar or his ministers. He wished to demonstrate to all the Russian people that the Tsar was not the father of the nation, but its murderer. To best achieve his goal, he undertook all necessary measures so that workers' blood would be spilled. It is important to highlight the fact that Russia was waging a war in the Far East during the events of Bloody Sunday, and Japan supported revolutionary and subversive activities in Russia. The historian Oldenburg spoke about this very briefly in his book The Reign of Emperor Nicholas II.
Time worked in Russia's favor. Japan, which had previously used all its forces, was still ahead, but Russia was beginning to catch up with her. The defeat of the Japanese forces seemed possible at first glance, and to avoid this possibility, it was necessary to sabotage the Russian army's rear and support internal unrest. Japanese General Akashi Motojiro played a special role in subversive activities in the rear of the warring Russia. It was through Akash that Russian revolutionaries were financed, and not only them, Finnish, Polish, and Caucasian separatists also received material support. Japanese money was received by the leader of the Finnish Active Resistance Party, journalist Konni Ziliakos, and a leader of the Georgian Socialist Federalist Party, Georgy Dekanoshvili. In July 1904, Akashi met with Plekhanov and Lenin in Geneva. Through Ziliakos, he financed the Paris Conference of Russian opposition parties in 1904 and the Geneva Conference in 1905. In total, through Akashi, about yen 1 million allocated by the Japanese General Staff was spent on subversive activities in Russia.
On December 19, 1904, 6 workers at the Putilov Iron Works in St. Petersburg were fired because of their membership in the Assembly of Russian Factory and Mill Workers of St. Petersburg, although the plant manager asserted that they were fired for unrelated reasons. Virtually the entire workforce of the Putilov Iron Works went on strike when the plant manager refused to accede to their requests that the workers be rehired. The demands had already increased, but so far they were exclusively economic. All this is happening during the war. All strikes were prohibited since the factories were fulfilling important military orders. This fact did not bother the strikers. On the contrary, the leader and organizer of the workers' meeting, Gapon, later recalled,
We decided that if our demands were not met within 2 days, we would extend the strike to the Franco-Russian shipbuilding and Semyanikovsky factories, where there were 14,000 workers. I chose these factories because I knew that just at that time they were fulfilling very serious orders for the needs of the war.
The Putilov plant was not alone on strike. Subsequently, the strike spread to other factories. On January 4th, a strike began at the Obukhov and Nevsky factories. 26,000 people are on strike. Later, they were joined by workers of the Franco-Russian shipbuilding plant and the Semyanikovsky plant. But you shouldn't think that all this happened spontaneously. Workers from striking factories broke into other factories and began agitation, calling for them to join the strike. By January 6th, about 40,000 people were already on strike. Threats and violence were used against workers who refused to go on strike.
If the events of Bloody Sunday were a revolutionary attempt to overthrow the Tsarist Empire, then why did some of the demonstrators carry pictures of the Tsar and icons?
Some demonstrators held icons, church flags, and portraits of the Tsar in their hands because they did not know what lay ahead of them. They believed Gapon's fraudulent promises and did not know that the Tsar was not present in the palace that day. They were the first to be surprised by the violent behavior of the other demonstrators. They had peaceful intentions and believed that they would meet the Tsar to present him with their modest petition. They also did not know that the content of the petition had almost nothing to do with them.
What was Tsar Nicholas II's reaction when he heard about the events of Bloody Sunday?
Late in the evening of January 8th, the Minister of Internal Affairs arrived in Tsarskoye Selo. His Majesty deigned to receive the Minister of Internal Affairs Sviatopolk Mirsky from 11:40 p.m. In his report to the Emperor, he tried in every possible way to present the situation in St. Petersburg as not worthy of attention. Instead of asking the Tsar for urgent sanction for decisive actions, Sviatopolk Mirsky tried his best to reassure Tsar Nicholas II. After the minister's departure, the Tsar wrote in his diary,
"Since yesterday, all factories and plants have been on strike in St. Petersburg. Troops were called from the surrounding area to reinforce the garrison. The workers have been calm so far. Their number is determined. The workers' union is headed by a socialist priest, Gapon." Mirsky came in the evening to report on the measures taken.
As we see, in the Tsar's diary there is not a word about the upcoming procession, the petition, its content, revolutionary militants, or barricades being built. If the Tsar had known about the impending procession, he could have prevented it. Unfortunately, he became the main target for accusations from revolutionaries, society, and the common people, deceived just like him. The Tsar learned full information about what happened in St. Petersburg only late in the evening of January 9th. He was shocked as we read through his diary.
9th of January. Sunday. Hard day. In Petersburg there was serious unrest due to the workers' wish to reach the Winter Palace. The troops had to shoot in different parts of the city, and there were many victims. Lord, how painful and hard.
Tsar Nicholas II understood that his ministers failed in their task and misled him. Treason and cowardice lurked everywhere. One could not be completely sure of almost everyone. Empress Alexandra wrote into her sister, Princess Victoria of Battenberg,
"You understand the crisis we are going through. It is a time full of trials, indeed. My poor Nicky's cross is a heavy one to bear, all the more so as he has nobody on whom he can thoroughly rely and who can be a real help to him. He has had so many bitter disappointments, but through it all, he remains brave and full of faith in God's mercy. He tries so hard and works with such perseverance, but the lack of what I call real men is great. The poor workmen, who had been utterly misled, had to suffer, and the organizers have hidden as usual behind them. Don't believe all the horrors the foreign papers say. They make one's hair stand on end, a foul exaggeration. Unfortunately, the troops were obliged to fire. Repeatedly, the crowd was told to retreat and that Nicky was not in town, as we are living here at Tsarskoye Selo this winter. The petition had only 2 questions concerning the workmen, and all the rest was atrocious. Had a small deputation brought, calmly, a real petition for the workers is good, all would have been otherwise. Many of the workmen were in despair when they heard later what the petition contained and begged to work again under the protection of the troops.
In the same letter, Empress Alexandra draws attention to the acute shortage of personnel that her husband experienced.
In the past, his father had found a large number of people who could occupy the necessary positions, but now we only have old people or very young people.
Immediately after the events of January 9th, the resignations of those who, in the opinion of the Tsar, were responsible for the bloody events began. On January 18th, a meeting of ministers was held regarding the events. It was proposed to draw up a manifesto that would express grief in connection with the tragedy of January 9th and also indicated that the Tsar did not know about the expected march of the people and that the troops did not act on his orders. However, Tsar Nicholas II did not want to relieve himself of responsibility and rejected the idea of a manifesto. Instead, the Tsar ordered a delegation of the workers to be assembled in the Alexander Palace. The selection of workers was entrusted to General Trepov. From each plant in the St. Petersburg region, a certain number of representatives were appointed to the Electoral Assembly, which selected 30 deputies from among itself to present to the sovereign. On January 19th, Tsar Nicholas II met a delegation of 34 capital workers at the Alexander Palace, to whom he said a few words about the latest unrest. First, the Tsar addressed the workers with a prepared speech. After the speech, the emperor unexpectedly invited the workers to express their wishes and requests. Kokovtsov noted that the Tsar spoke very kindly to almost every one of them. He asked them questions about their condition and what they were doing before joining the demonstrations. Then they were served tea and sandwiches, and everyone returned to their homes. The Tsar showed mercy and care for the victims. Tsar Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra allocated 50,000 rubles from their funds to assist family members of the victims. This amount was paid until the February Revolution of 1917. The events of January 9th had such an impact on the Tsar that, according to available information, at the beginning of 1905 he confessed to the hieromonk of the Gethsemane monastery, who predicted the crown of martyrdom for the Tsar. After Bloody Sunday, Gapon escaped from Russia, where he had close ties with the Socialist Revolutionary Party. Gapon and Rutenberg were welcomed in Europe by prominent Russians such as Vladimir Lenin, Peter Kropotkin, and French socialist leaders. He found sanctuary in Geneva and London. He continued to take part in revolutionary events, issuing extremist appeals to the proletariat, in which he called for killing ministers, mayors, governors, police officers, policemen, police guards, gendarmes, generals, and officers. On February 7th, he called from Geneva upon the workers in Russia to rise in arms against the Tsar, to whom he sent a threatening and aggressive letter in which he wrote the following.
Nicholas Romanov, formerly Tsar and at present sole murderer of the Russian Empire, the innocent blood of workers, their wives and children lies forever between you and the Russian people. May all the blood that must be spilled fall upon you, you hangman.
At the end of this letter, Gapon informed the Tsar that copies of his letter had been sent to all the branches of the terrorist revolutionary movement in Russia. 140,000 people took to the streets of St. Petersburg on January 9th. In total, the figures given in the report of the director of the police department to the Minister of Internal Affairs were 130 killed and 299 wounded. The next day, newspapers published the names of all the dead. They were buried at public expense. Most likely, if the crowd had managed to reach the city center, there would have been many more casualties. The press immediately began to throw deliberately exaggerated death tolls into the public space. The magazine Liberation determined the number of people killed at 1,216. In an article by Lenin, published in 1905 in the newspaper Forward, the figure of 4,600 killed and wounded, which later became widely circulated in Soviet historiography. Other foreign agencies reported similar inflated figures. Thus, the British Laffan Agency reported 2,000 killed and 5,000 wounded. The Daily Mail newspaper reported more than 2,000 killed and 5,000 wounded, and the Standard newspaper reported 2,000, 3,000 killed and 7,000, 8,000 wounded. Ironically, the term Bloody Sunday itself has English roots. Bloody Sunday of England was an event that took place in London on November 13, 1887, when a crowd of marchers protested about unemployment and the Irish Coercion Acts, as well as demanding the release of MP William O'Brien, and clashed with the Metropolitan Police. The distortion and exaggeration did not only include the number of victims, but also included art. Several bloody paintings appeared depicting the events of Bloody Sunday as a massacre carried out by Tsarist forces against peaceful workers. In addition to offensive caricatures, the head of the St. Petersburg Security Department, Gerasimov, cites in his memoirs Gapon's words about the alleged plan to kill the Tsar, which Gapon told him about during a conversation with him and Rachkovsky.
Suddenly I asked him if it was true that on 9 January there was a plan to shoot the Tsar as he came out to the people.
Gapon replied,
Yes, that's true. It would be terrible if this plan came to fruition. The Lord saved him. It was not my plan but Rutenberg's.
The events of Bloody Sunday are one of the tragic events that occurred in Russia in the 20th century. The events of Bloody Sunday were not peaceful demonstrations of workers, but rather an attempt to overthrow power, as revolutionaries planned and participated in them under the guise of defending workers' rights. Tsar Nicholas II was not guilty and did not give any orders to fire, and when he learned of the events, he paid compensation and held those responsible accountable. The shooting was not a criminal act, but rather a natural reaction of the forces due to the violence and continuous provocations of the demonstrators who threatened public security. Unfortunately, the events of Bloody Sunday were used, like other events, to discredit the Tsar.